We come this morning to our third sermon in this series and church-wide book study we've been doing on Gary Moon's Apprenticeship with Jesus. What we've been trying to emphasize is that the whole Christian enterprise, the real essence of discipleship, is assimilating to ourselves the very ways and manner of Jesus' life. Last week, we talked about the image of God, the imago Dei, how God created us in God's image and likeness. And what that meant is that God created human beings to be free to love God and to love one another and to serve creation. And yet, sin entered creation, this power that disfigured the image of God within us, making our hearts inclined to self-interest and just too much self-love. One of the things that we emphasized last week as well is that God did not create us to be this way. God did not create us to be self-serving. He didn't create us to be sinners. And so what that means is that to be truly human would be to be without sin. And of course, that's who Jesus was. According to the New Testament, Jesus, he was without sin. Therefore, he was the perfect expression of the image of God, of the kind of human life you and I were created to share. And so the more we become like Christ as his apprentices, the more we become ourselves. Now, here's the thing. Once you and I become proficient at imitating Jesus, there is an unavoidable consequence that is going to happen. We're going to look, in the eyes of everyone else, we're going to look crazy. We're going to look foolish. We're going to look like we're going counterclockwise in a clockwise world. We will look countercultural. And so we have to be willing to embrace this. Let's think just a little bit further on this whole notion of imitation. It just predominates the book, and I've referenced it before in other sermons, but it's so foundational to understand what this apprenticeship with Jesus is trying to get at. Human beings, you and I, are imitators. Other creatures in the animal kingdom, they tend to operate mostly on instinct. You know, when other animals are born or when they're hatched, they pretty much know what to do. They know how to swim, they know how to walk, they know what foods to eat. But you and I as human beings, we primarily obtain our sense of self-understanding through imitation. You know, you and I, we speak English. Why? Well, because we imitated others around us speaking English. You and I dress a certain way during the week or maybe on Sunday mornings. Why? Well, because we are imitating how other people dress through the week or maybe on Sunday morning. You know, you and I, we eat certain foods at breakfast. Why? Because we're basically imitating other people who eat these certain foods at breakfast. I suppose if we all ate green beans for breakfast, we would eat green beans. That's just what we do. We're imitators. Now, here's the thing, everybody, about imitation. Since you and I imitate each other, what this can do is that it can create these vast networks of dysfunction. Why? Because if we're imitating each other, and if the scriptures say that all of us are bent towards self-interest, then in our imitation of each other, we are going to generate these vast systems and networks of dysfunction and disorder. And these networks of dysfunction and disorder is precisely what the New Testament calls the world. Doesn't mean creation. We're not talking about, the mountains or the ocean. But the world in the New Testament refers to this vast network of disordered desires, of dysfunction that everybody seems to be operating by, and everybody operating in it thinks it's pretty normal. Like fish swimming in polluted waters. They don't necessarily know it's polluted waters. So when Paul says in our lesson today from Romans chapter 12, do not be conformed to this world, Or when John says in his first letter, which was also read this morning, do not love the world or the things in this world, what Paul and John are both meaning is that we have to live in a manner that is opposite to this vast network of dysfunction and disorder. Here's the problem. You and I are imitators. It's what we do. So unless we have a model to imitate this different way of life, we can't do it. Now we understand the importance of Jesus. Now we can get why the scriptures say we have to imitate his way. Because if we don't imitate his way, which will make us go in the opposite direction of these systems of dysfunction, if we don't imitate him, then we are by default, everybody, we are going to go in the very direction as everyone else. You know, our first reading this morning comes from 1 John, and 1 John says that the lifestyles that manifest these systems of dysfunction, they really show themselves, this lifestyle, in three ways. Here's what he says in chapter 2. He says, "For all that is in the world, the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, the pride in riches, comes not from the Father, but from the world." Let's think about those three things very briefly. Think about the first symptom, John says, that shows the dysfunctions of the world, the desire of the flesh. We can think of the desire of the flesh as a life totally devoted to pleasure seeking and to the gratification of bodily passions and urges. Think about the next thing. The desire of the eyes, John says. Think of the desire of the eyes as a life devoted to acquiring everything that will make me or you look very important in the eyes of the world. You can think of the pursuit of wealth or luxurious commodities, all the trappings of success, a life devoted to looking extremely important to the eyes of others. Then think of the last one, the pride in riches. Riches can make the ego swell. We can think of ourselves as being more important than we really are. The other translations say it as this way, it's the pride of life. So you can think of it as John calling this the life that I am the center of the universe. I must put myself in the center of everything. Everybody's got to orbit around me. So it's the life that loves its own autonomy and independence. Now I want you to think about those three things: the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, looking important, the pride of life, being the center of the universe. Well, you put all that together, that looks normal in this world. A life devoted to pleasure, commodity, self-importance. We would say that's kind of a right. We all have a right to live that kind of life. But the New Testament is so clear that no, those who operate in that direction in life are actually destroying their own souls. They are essentially dehumanizing themselves because God did not create us to devote our lives to these kinds of things. That is why Jesus calls us to apprentice to him, to imitate his way, so that we will actually reorder our lives to God. But if we're going to reorder our lives to God, we're now going to look disordered in the eyes of the rest of the world. We will look ridiculous. I said this, I think, before in a previous sermon. I heard it from someone else. But if everybody is running toward a cliff, and then there's one person running in the opposite direction, well, the person running in the opposite direction looks like an idiot. But actually, that person is very wise. And to be a Christian is to be that person running in the opposite direction from the masses. Gary Moon in the book, I love how he put it. and maybe you saw this, is that to be a Christian is to be an odd number. I love that. A Christian is odd in its number. In other words, we're not even numbers. We are different from the world. That's why, and preachers have preached this 1,000 times, that the very worst form of witness that you and I can give to the world is to live like everybody else, as if this life is all there is. I mean, non-believers, you can ask a non-believer, even an atheist, well, what do you want your life to be about? Well, I want to have fun. I want to be rich. I want to be popular, famous. I want the nicest stuff. Well, everybody, if that's the best answer we can give, if that's how we're really living our lives, we're no different than even the unbelieving world. We say things, even as Christians, like, well, you only live once. You only live once. But that's not true. Jesus, everybody, Jesus never said, you only live once, YOLO. That's not one of Jesus's beatitudes. You only live once. No, there is another life to come. And in the life in the world to come, everyone is going to be radically conformed to the way of Jesus. Life in the world to come, everyone in heaven and in the kingdom of God is going to have to live according to the value systems of Jesus. Everyone who will luxuriate in heaven will have learned to live according to the humility of Jesus, the mercy of Jesus, His love for the poor, His chastity, His forgiveness, everything about His way of life. Paul in Romans 12 catalogs all this countercultural practices that you and I are supposed to assimilate into our lives. Bless those who persecute us. Don't return evil with evil. Return evil with good. That's countercultural, but that's what life in the next world is going to be. I can think of it this way, and maybe this is a silly analogy, but if I could guarantee you that in 8 to 10 years, everyone in the world will have to speak Latin. And if you don't speak Latin, you are not going to be able to function and operate in the world. Well, if you're wise, you're going to learn how to speak Latin now. You're going to learn the language. And the whole point of apprenticing to Jesus is learning right now how to become fluent in His way, so that when we stand before His presence, in His kingdom that comes in all of its fullness, we will know how to speak His language, the language of love. But to speak our Lord's language right now in this world, operating in all kinds of dysfunctional, disordered desires, well, the Lord's language seems unintelligible, but it's actually the very language of God. G.K. Chesterton, one of my favorite writers, I've mentioned him before, he said this. He says, I owe all my success to having listened to the very best advice and then going away and doing the exact opposite. That just about sums the entire Christian existence. Don't be conformed to this world. Be conformed to the ways of Jesus. Because in the eyes of God, imitating Jesus, that's normal. To live any other way in the scope of eternity, that's what's crazy.